basement stairs seemed to stretch endlessly as I tumbled down. "Old man, you're pathetic," my son Troy spat from above. My shoulder slammed against concrete as the lock clicked shut. At 68, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would imprison me. "Stay there and don't ruin our trip," he shouted through the door. Blood trickled from my temple, but something hardened inside me. This house I built with my own hands would not become my prison. Troy would learn that breaking my bones was easier than breaking my spirit. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my basement for what felt like hours, listening to the sounds of suitcases being loaded into the family SUV. The engine started, tires crunched on gravel, and then silence. Only then did I allow myself to really feel the pain radiating from my shoulder and wrist. This house on Maple Street had been my pride and joy for 40 years. I built it with my own 2 hands when Sarah and I were just starting out. We were so young then, barely in our 20s, but so full of dreams. I remembered how Sarah would bring me lemonade while I worked through the summer heat, her belly swollen with our son, our Troy. Sarah had been gone for 5 years now. Pancreatic cancer. It took her so quickly that some days I still turned to tell her something before remembering she wasn't there. After she passed, the house felt too big, too empty. When Troy called 2 years ago saying he had lost his job at the investment firm and needed a place to stay temporarily, I was almost relieved. Having my son, his wife Judy, and my teenage grandkids Austin and Brittany around would fill the emptiness. That first month was awkward but pleasant enough. They took the main bedroom while I moved into the smaller guest room. It seemed reasonable since there were 4 of them and only 1 of me. But temporary became permanent. Boxes remained unpacked in the garage. Troy stopped mentioning job interviews. Judy redecorated the living room without asking, removing all photos of Sarah. "We need to freshen this place up, Dad," Troy had said when I protested. "It looks like a time capsule from the 80s. Maybe it did, but they were my memories." The drinking started about 6 months in. Troy had always enjoyed his bourbon, but after losing his job, the drinking became daily. The jokes about old man Damien started around then too. Small digs at first. Complaints about my hearing, my slow movements, the way I prepared my coffee. "Jesus, Dad, could you slurp any louder? You sound like a dog drinking from a toilet," he would say at breakfast. Judy would laugh nervously while the kids stared at their phones. I endured it, telling myself that Troy was just struggling with his pride, that things would improve once he found work. But the months stretched on, and the comments grew sharper, meaner. The respect that Sarah had always insisted upon was completely gone. Last month, I noticed discrepancies in my bank statements. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. $3,000 missing from my retirement account, then another $5,000. When confronted, Troy claimed I had offered to help with their expenses. Perhaps I had, but not to that extent. When I mentioned contacting the bank to report fraud, Troy became eerily calm. "No one would believe you anyway," he said. "You can barely remember what day it is half the time." The truth was, my memory was perfectly fine. But Troy had been planting seeds of doubt with neighbors and family friends. The word senile had been thrown around at the last family barbecue, always followed by Troy's practiced look of concerned affection. Yesterday morning, I overheard Troy and Judy in the kitchen planning their 2-week vacation to Florida. Disney World for the kids. A beachfront condo, all paid for with my retirement funds. But something else in their conversation chilled me to the bone. "I talked to Dr. Peterson yesterday," Troy whispered. "He says with Dad's deteriorating condition, we could have him declared incompetent pretty easily. The paperwork can be processed while we're gone, and when we get back, we can move him straight to Sunny Pines." Sunny Pines was a state-run nursing home on the edge of town. The kind of place where people went to die surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and neglect. "Are you sure about this?" Judy asked, her voice tight. "It seems extreme. What choice do we have?" "He's becoming paranoid, making accusations. Besides, this house is practically ours now. We just need to make it official." I stepped into the kitchen then, pretending I hadn't heard, but the look Troy gave me told me everything. This was no longer my son. This was a stranger wearing his face, living in my house, planning to steal my life. When I confronted Troy about the missing money this morning, I thought I was prepared for his anger. I wasn't. The sound of my son's footsteps stomping down the stairs for breakfast this morning replays in my mind as I sit in the darkness of the basement. He had entered the kitchen with that familiar scowl, hungover and irritable. Judy busied herself packing sandwiches for their drive, while the kids loaded the final suitcases. "Troy," I had said carefully, sliding a bank statement across the kitchen counter. "We need to talk about this before you leave." He glanced at the paper, then crumpled it and tossed it toward the trash. "There's nothing to talk about. You agreed to help with expenses. I agreed to help with groceries and utilities, not fund a Florida vacation," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I certainly didn't agree to have $8,000 withdrawn from my retirement account." Troy's face reddened. "You ungrateful old man. We've been taking care of you for 2 years, cooking your meals, driving you to doctor's appointments, listening to the same war stories over and over. I never asked for your care," I said. "You asked to move in with me. Temporarily." Judy had stopped packing, her eyes darting between us. Austin and Brittany stood frozen in the doorway, suitcases in hand. "If the money isn't returned," I continued, "I'll have to report it to the bank and the police." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Troy laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Go ahead, call them," he sneered. "By the time they sort it out, you'll be drooling in a home." "I heard what Dr. Peterson told you last week about early signs of dementia." "Dr. Peterson never said anything about dementia," I countered, "because I don't have it. You've been lying to everyone, including your own family." Troy's face transformed then, all pretense dropping away. His voice lowered to a growl. "You think anyone would take your word over mine? Everyone in town knows you're losing it, Dad. I've made sure of that." I looked at my grandchildren, seeing confusion in Austin's eyes and something like fear in Brittany's. "Kids," I said gently, "would you mind giving your father and me a minute alone?" "Don't move," Troy ordered them, then turned back to me. "You know what your problem is, Dad? You never knew when to shut up. Mom always had to manage you, keep you in line. Well, she's gone now, and no one's protecting you anymore." I felt a cold shock at the casual cruelty. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." That was when he snapped. Troy lunged across the kitchen, grabbing my shirt collar with both hands. "Don't you dare talk about her," he hissed. "You couldn't save her. You were useless then, and you're useless now." I tried to break his grip, but at 68, I was no match for my 42-year-old son. He dragged me toward the basement door, throwing it open with such force that it banged against the wall. Judy gasped, but didn't intervene. The kids stood paralyzed. "Troy, stop this," I pleaded. "Think about what you're doing." "I've thought about it plenty," he said, shoving me toward the stairs. "Old man, you're pathetic." I felt my balance go. The world tilted. I grasped desperately for the handrail but missed. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion. My shoulder hit first, sending shockwaves of pain through my body. Then my hip, my knee, until I finally came to rest at the bottom, my temple striking the concrete floor. Above me, Troy's face appeared in the doorway, contorted with rage but also something else. Satisfaction. "Stay there and don't ruin our trip," he called down. "You can think about how to be more grateful when we get back." The door slammed shut. The lock turned. Footsteps retreated. I lay there in shock, trying to assess the damage. My shoulder throbbed intensely, possibly dislocated. My wrist bent at an unnatural angle, definitely broken. Blood trickled into my eye from the cut on my temple. But worst of all was the knowledge that my own son had done this to me. Slowly, painfully, I dragged myself to a sitting position against the wall. The basement was mostly dark, illuminated only by 2 small ground-level windows that let in weak shafts of morning light. It was cold down here, the concrete floor sapping heat from my body. I took stock of my surroundings. The basement had once been my workshop, but Troy had gradually filled it with boxes and discarded furniture. There was a utility sink in the corner, thankfully, but no bathroom. An old freezer hummed against one wall, but I knew it contained nothing but ice and frozen pizzas. A few shelves held paint cans, tools, and various household supplies, nothing immediately useful for escape. As the reality of my situation sank in, a wave of panic threatened to overwhelm me. They would be gone for 2 weeks. 14 days in this cold, dark basement. Could I survive that long? Would anyone miss me and come looking? The answer was painfully clear. Troy had been methodically isolating me for months, telling neighbors I was becoming reclusive, canceling my regular poker games, screening my phone calls. No one would think it strange not to see me for 2 weeks. My thoughts were interrupted by the discovery of a thin folder that had fallen from Troy's pocket during our struggle. With my good hand, I opened it, squinting in the dim light to read the contents. The documents inside sent ice through my veins. Loan applications, home, equity, paperwork, all bearing what appeared to be my signature, but signatures I had never made. Troy hadn't just been stealing from my accounts. He had been systematically forging my name on loan documents, essentially stealing my house from under me. The final page was the most damning. A partially completed power of attorney form, awaiting only a doctor's signature to transfer all my legal rights to Troy. In that moment, something changed inside me. The pain receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. This house that I had built with my own hands, the home where I had raised Troy and loved Sarah, would not become my tomb. My son thought he had imprisoned a feeble old man. He was wrong. The first 24 hours in the basement were the hardest. The pain from my injuries made sleep nearly impossible, and the chill of the concrete seeped into my bones. I tore strips from an old sheet to bind my broken wrist as best I could, and fashioned a sling from a pillowcase found in a storage box. It felt strangely familiar, this process of improvising medical care. My mind drifted back to Vietnam, 1968, the rainy season. Our unit had been separated from the main force, and I had a bullet graze on my thigh. No medic, no supplies, just me and what I could find in the jungle. I survived then. I would survive now. Assess, adapt, overcome, my old sergeant used to say. So I began a systematic inventory of my prison. Water was available from the utility sink, solving one immediate concern. Food would be trickier. I found some ancient protein bars in my old fishing tackle box and a jar of peanuts that seemed reasonably fresh. It wasn't much, but I could ration it to last several days if necessary. The basement temperature was my next concern. Nights in Pennsylvania could get cold, even in early summer. I located some paint tarps and an old sleeping bag from our family camping days. Not comfortable, but I could avoid hypothermia. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began exploring more thoroughly. The basement was larger than it appeared, extending under the entire house. 40 years of family life had accumulated down here in boxes and bins. In one corner, I found Sarah's old photo albums. Despite my situation, I found myself sitting on an overturned crate, paging through memories. Our wedding day, Troy's birth, family vacations to the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the Florida Keys. There was Troy at 10 years old, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught, his smile so wide it barely fit his face. What had happened to that boy? When had he turned into the cruel man who had thrown me down these stairs? I closed the album, unable to reconcile the images with reality. As I did, I felt the weight of my cell phone in my pocket. I had completely forgotten it was there. Hope surged through me, only to crash down when I saw there was no signal. Of course not. The basement walls were thick concrete, practically a bunker. Still, it was something. The battery showed 40% charge. If I could somehow get a signal, I could call for help. I began a methodical search, holding the phone up in every corner of the basement, climbing on boxes despite the pain in my wrist, pressing the phone against the small windows. Nothing. After hours of trying, I finally detected one weak bar of reception in the northwest corner, standing on a workbench directly under a small window well. It was precarious, and the signal flickered in and out, but it was my only connection to the outside world. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, but the call failed twice before connecting on the third try. Just as the dispatcher answered, the phone beeped a critical battery warning and went dead in my hand. Fighting despair, I carefully climbed down. I needed to think strategically. The phone was useless without power. I searched through boxes until I found an old extension cord. The only outlet was near the washing machine, 30 feet from my signal spot. I would have to charge the phone, then disconnect it and make my call before the battery died again. While waiting for the phone to charge, I continued exploring. Behind some Christmas decorations, I found a small box labeled Sarah's Personal. Inside was a diary I had never seen before, bound in faded blue leather. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder in my dead wife's private thoughts. But my situation was desperate. I might find something useful. The diary entries spanned the last year of Sarah's life. Many pages detailed her treatments, her fears, her love for me. But entries from her final months revealed something shocking. Sarah had been concerned about Troy's behavior long before I noticed any problems. Damien doesn't see it, she wrote 3 months before her death. The way Troy manipulates situations, the lies, the financial schemes. I've tried to talk to him about it, but he dismisses it as normal business practices. I'm afraid of what might happen when I'm gone. Troy has always been jealous of Damien's success, his integrity. I've spoken with Jack about adding protections to the will, making sure Damien is legally secure. If something happens to me, Jack has instructions. Jack Webster had been our attorney and my friend for decades. Sarah had never mentioned any special arrangements to me, but then, she had always protected me, sometimes from truths she thought would hurt me. The diary entry gave me a new resolve. I checked my phone. 20% charge. Enough for one brief call. I climbed back to my signal spot, balanced precariously, and dialed Jack's number from memory. It rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart sank. Then, Jack Webster speaking. "Jack, it's Damien," I said quickly, the signal crackling. "I don't have much time. Troy has locked me in my basement and taken the family to Florida. He's been stealing from me, forging documents. I need help." "Damien, what are you talking about? Are you drunk?" "No." I struggled to keep my balance. "I'm serious. He pushed me down the stairs. I'm injured. They'll be gone for 2 weeks. I need someone to come let me out." There was a long pause. "This isn't a joke, is it?" "No, Jack. I swear on Sarah's grave." His tone changed immediately. "Where is your spare key? The one you used to keep under the garden gnome?" Troy got rid of the gnome. "There's a fake rock by the hydrangeas now. I'm calling the police and coming over. Hang tight, old friend." "Wait," I said urgently, watching the battery indicator blinking red. "Check if the house is still in my name. Troy's been forging my signature on loans and documents. I'll bring the property records." "And Damien? Sarah told me to watch out for you." I should have been paying closer attention. The call dropped as my phone finally died. I carefully climbed down, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that help was coming. Anger at Troy's betrayal. Sadness that Sarah had seen problems I had been blind to. And oddly, a growing sense of determination. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about justice. I woke to the sound of knocking. Faint, distant. Someone at the front door. I scrambled up from my makeshift bed, ignoring the protest of my injuries. "Down here!" I shouted, banging on the basement ceiling with a broom handle. "In the basement!" The knocking stopped. Had they heard me? I continued pounding, moving toward the small windows, hoping my voice would carry outside. Minutes later, I heard a scraping noise at one of the window wells. A shadow fell across the glass, and then Jack's familiar face appeared, peering in. "Damien, my God, are you all right? Broken wrist, bruised shoulder, but I'll live. Can you get me out?" Jack's expression was grim. "The police are on their way, but these windows are too small for you to climb through. We'll have to break down the door." While waiting for the police, Jack updated me through the window. He had checked the county records. The house was still legally in my name, though Troy had indeed taken out several equity loans using forged documents. "The good news," Jack shouted, "is that the forgeries are pretty obvious. The bad news is that Troy has been telling everyone in town that your mental state is deteriorating. He's laid a lot of groundwork." When the police finally arrived, they were reluctant to force entry based solely on Jack's word. I heard them questioning him outside, suggesting this might be a family dispute best left alone. "Officer," Jack argued, "I am looking at a 68-year-old man with untreated injuries who has been locked in a basement against his will. That's elder abuse and false imprisonment at minimum." Still, without direct evidence of my identity or ownership, they hesitated. Through the window, I watched their skeptical expressions, no doubt influenced by whatever rumors Troy had spread. "Check the property records," I called out, "and look in my office upstairs. There's a photograph of me with the chief at last year's veterans' dinner." This seemed to sway them, but as they were discussing how to proceed, a county car pulled up. A woman in a suit emerged, introduced herself to the officers, and they spoke in low voices I couldn't make out. Minutes later, the officers departed without taking action. "What happened?" I asked Jack desperately. "Adult Protective Services," he replied, his voice tight with anger. "Apparently Troy filed a report before leaving, claiming you were experiencing dementia symptoms and had threatened self-harm. They're requiring a psychological evaluation before they'll consider this an emergency. That could take days." "Exactly Troy's plan, I'd wager." Jack's face disappeared from the window, then returned. "I'm not giving up. I've got another idea, but it's a bit unorthodox. Do you trust me?" "With my life," I answered, without hesitation. "Good. Because I'm thinking we might need to beat Troy at his own game." Jack explained his plan, which was audacious to say the least. If Troy wanted to play games with my house, we'd give him a game he wasn't expecting. The next morning, Jack returned with a woman he introduced through the window as Maureen Sullivan, a realtor specializing in quick sales. At first, she was skeptical of the situation, peering uncertainly through the dirty basement window at my battered face. "This is highly unusual, Mr. Miller," she said. "Call me Damien, please. And yes, I realize how this looks. But Jack has the deed and my ID to prove ownership. I want to sell my house, and I want to do it before my son returns from vacation. May I ask why you don't just wait until you're out of your current situation?" I gestured to my injuries. "Because my son did this to me, Miss Sullivan. And when he returns, he plans to have me declared incompetent and committed to a nursing home so he can take legal possession of this house. I'm selling it out from under him while I still can." Her expression softened with understanding. "I see. Well, the market in this neighborhood is very hot right now. If you're willing to price aggressively, I could have offers within days." And so began one of the strangest home selling experiences in Pennsylvania history. Maureen took exterior photos and measurements, and used old listing photos from when neighboring houses had sold to create a compelling listing. Jack provided all the necessary documentation to prove my ownership and authority to sell. I directed everything from my basement prison, using my now charged phone during the brief windows when I could get reception. The process gave me focus, a project to pour my energy into instead of dwelling on pain and betrayal. Maureen scheduled an open house for the weekend, just 3 days after listing. Jack arranged for a locksmith to change the exterior locks so she could bring potential buyers through, though the basement door remained securely locked from the outside. During the open house, I stayed absolutely silent, ignoring the footsteps above me. The last thing I needed was for someone to discover a senior citizen locked in the basement and call authorities, triggering the APS hold Troy had engineered. That night, Maureen called with exciting news. The open house had generated multiple offers, all over asking price. The highest was from a young couple, Frank and Nancy Carter, who had offered 15% above listing price for a quick, cash closing. "They're expecting their first child," Maureen explained. "They fell in love with the character of the home and the big yard. They can close in 7 days if you accept." Something about their situation touched me. A young family, just starting out, much like Sarah and I had been 4 decades ago. I accepted their offer immediately, but I was still trapped. The sale wouldn't help if I couldn't get out of the basement before Troy returned. Jack had tried every legal avenue to have me released but had been blocked at every turn by Troy's advanced preparations. On the 6th day of my captivity, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Using tools I'd found in old storage boxes, I began working on the small basement window with the best exterior access. The frame was old, the wood softened by years of moisture. With a screwdriver and hammer, I slowly, painfully loosened it, working between periods of rest for my injured wrist. By evening, I had created enough space to potentially squeeze through, though it would be tight. I waited until dark, then used the last of my strength to pull myself up and through the narrow opening, scraping my sides and back in the process. After 6 days in darkness, the cool night air felt like freedom itself as I tumbled onto the lawn. Jack was waiting in his car down the street, as we had arranged by phone. He helped me into the passenger seat, wincing at my condition. "Hospital first," he said firmly, ignoring my protests. "No," I replied. "Maureen's office first. I want this sale finalized before Troy has any chance to interfere." Jack looked like he wanted to argue but saw the determination in my eyes. "Closing is scheduled for tomorrow anyway. We can go sign the papers now, then straight to the hospital." As we drove away from the house I had built with my own hands, I didn't look back. That chapter of my life was closing, but a new one where I reclaimed my power and dignity, was just beginning. The next 7 days passed in a blur of hospitals, legal offices, and recovery at Jack's guest house. The doctors confirmed my wrist was indeed broken, requiring a cast. My shoulder was severely sprained, but not dislocated. The cut on my temple needed stitches and left me with a noticeable scar. "Physical evidence," Jack noted grimly, taking photographs for the police report we had filed. My physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional wounds cut deeper. How had I not seen what Troy was becoming? What signs had I missed over the years? Had I somehow failed him as a father? The house closing went smoothly. Frank and Nancy Carter were a delightful couple in their early 30s. Frank worked in software development. Nancy was a pediatric nurse, currently on maternity leave, with their first child due in 2 months. They reminded me so much of Sarah and me at that age that I found myself including some items in the sale that I had planned to keep. The dining room set was handmade by my father. I told them during our brief meeting at the closing. It should stay with the house. Nancy had tears in her eyes. "That's incredibly generous. We promised to take good care of it." The sale netted me considerably more than I had expected, thanks to the hot market and Maureen's aggressive strategy. After paying off the fraudulent loans Troy had taken out, I still had enough to secure my future comfortably. Jack had been monitoring Troy's credit card activity. The family was due to return tomorrow, which gave us time for one final preparation. Maureen arranged for the sold sign to be prominently placed in the front yard, with a new owner's taking possession rider attached. The next morning, Jack and I parked down the street, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest as Troy's SUV turned onto Maple Street around noon. I watched through binoculars as the vehicle slowed, then stopped abruptly in front of the house. Troy emerged first, staring in obvious disbelief at the sign. He pulled out his phone, presumably trying to call me, though my number had been changed. After a heated conversation with Judy, Troy stalked up to the front door and tried his key. When it didn't work, he began pounding on the door and peering through windows. "That's our cue," Jack said, starting the car. We pulled up behind Troy's SUV, blocking it in. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders despite the pain, and stepped out. Behind us, a police cruiser arrived, a precaution Jack had insisted on. Troy turned at the sound of car doors. The color drained from his face when he saw me, then returned in a furious flush when he recognized Jack. "What the hell is going on?" Troy demanded, storming toward us. "What have you done?" I stood my ground as he approached, though every instinct told me to back away. "I sold the house, Troy. Your vacation home now belongs to the Carter family." "You can't do that," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "That's my house. You're not mentally competent to make those decisions." "Actually," Jack interjected smoothly, "as Damien's attorney, I can confirm he is perfectly competent, as verified by 3 separate psychiatric evaluations conducted this week. The house was solely in his name, and he had every legal right to sell it." Judy had joined us now, looking bewildered. Austin and Brittany hung back by the car, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. "This is ridiculous," Troy sputtered, turning to Judy. "My father is clearly having some kind of breakdown. This is exactly why we were talking about assisted living." "Is that what you call locking me in the basement for 2 weeks?" I asked quietly. removing my jacket to reveal my cast and the bruises still visible on my arms. "Is that your version of assisted living?" Judy gasped, her hand going to her mouth. "What is he talking about, Troy?" "He's delusional," Troy insisted, though I could see sweat beading on his forehead. "Dad, you were fine when we left. We would never lock you in the basement. Tell her, kids." Austin stepped forward then, his face pale but determined. "That's not true, Dad." The silence that followed was deafening. Troy's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What did you say?" he hissed at his son. Austin swallowed hard, but continued. "I saw you push Grandpa down the stairs. I heard you lock the door." He turned to his mother, his voice breaking. "I tried to go back and let him out when you and Dad were packing the car, but you'd taken the key." "Austin, what are you talking about?" Judy asked, her voice trembling. The teenager pulled out his phone. "I've been recording Dad for months. The way he talks to Grandpa when you're not around. The things he says about taking his money, getting control of the house." He looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I should have told someone sooner." Troy lunged for the phone, but the police officer stepped between them. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. This is a family matter," Troy snarled. "Actually," the officer replied, "we have a report of elder abuse, assault, and false imprisonment. Those are criminal matters." What followed was chaotic and painful. Troy was arrested despite his protests and threats. Judy alternated between confusion, denial, and horror as the full story emerged. Brittany refused to look at me, apparently blaming me for her father's arrest. Only Austin seemed relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. After Troy was taken away in the police car, I approached Judy and the kids. "You can stay at the Residence Inn on Willow Street," I told them, handing Judy a key card. "I've paid for 2 weeks. That should give you time to figure out next steps." "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "After what Troy did." "Troy's actions aren't yours," I replied. "Or the kids. You're still family." As they drove away, Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "You're a better man than I would be in your situation." I watched the SUV disappear around the corner. No, I'm just old enough to know that revenge doesn't heal wounds. Only forgiveness can do that. I paused, looking back at my former home. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, or allowing yourself to be hurt again. Jack nodded in understanding. "Speaking of which, there's something else you should know." I had my paralegal do some digging into Troy's personal emails. "Damien. He's been having an affair with Judy's sister Tara for years." The revelation shouldn't have shocked me after everything else, but it did. "Does Judy know?" "Not yet. But the emails make it clear that Troy's plan was to have you institutionalized, sell the house himself, take the money, and leave Judy and the kids for Tara. He was just using your home as a waiting room until he could make his move." The full extent of my son's betrayal left me speechless. Not just me, but his own wife and children. What had happened to the boy I raised? Where had I gone so wrong? As if reading my thoughts, Jack squeezed my shoulder. "This isn't on you, Damien. Some people make their own darkness. All we can do is refuse to let it extinguish our light." The weeks following Troy's arrest were among the most difficult of my life. The physical injuries healed faster than the emotional ones, but both left scars I would carry forever. Troy was released on bail after 3 days, with orders to have no contact with me. Judy moved the family into a small apartment across town, using money I had given her from the house sale. The criminal case proceeded slowly, with Troy's attorney fighting every charge and painting me as a vindictive, confused old man taking revenge on a son who only wanted to care for me. The community's response was divided. Some neighbors who had known me for decades stood firmly by my side, outraged by what Troy had done. Others, particularly those who only knew the charming, public face Troy presented, questioned my version of events. Small-town gossip traveled fast, and I often felt eyes on me when I ventured into public. With part of the house proceeds, I purchased a small, single-level ranch home in a quiet community just outside town. It had wider doorways and no steps, accommodations I hadn't needed yet but might someday. At 68, I had to think practically about the future, especially now that I couldn't count on family support in my old age. Jack helped me furnish the new place with a mix of items from the old house that the Carters had allowed me to retrieve and new purchases. It was comfortable, but sparse. I found myself reluctant to accumulate too many possessions after seeing a lifetime of memories boxed up and moved. Austin visited every weekend, eager to escape the tense atmosphere at the apartment. His relationship with Troy had deteriorated completely after his testimony to police. I taught him basic carpentry in my new garage workshop, skills his father had never been interested in learning. "Dad says you manipulated me," Austin confided one Saturday as we built a bookshelf. "He says you're trying to turn me against him." I carefully measured a board before answering. "What do you think, Austin?" The boy considered this, running sandpaper along an edge with focus beyond his 17 years. "I think Dad has always been the manipulator. I just didn't want to see it." Brittany, meanwhile, refused all contact with me. According to Austin, she had fully embraced Troy's version of events, convinced I had orchestrated everything to punish her father for trying to get me proper care. It broke my heart, but I respected her choice. Time would either heal that wound or not. Jack reconnected me with my old Vietnam buddies, men I hadn't seen in years because Troy had gradually isolated me from them, claiming they were bad influences who encouraged me to live in the past. We started meeting weekly for coffee. These old soldiers with creaking joints and fading memories, but still so much life in their eyes. "Never thought I'd see combat wounds inflicted by family," said George, my former unit medic, examining my healing wrist. "Reminds me why I never had kids." "Troy isn't representative of all children," I defended automatically, the paternal instinct still strong despite everything. "No," agreed Bill, the quietest of our group. "But what he did represents something happening across the country. Children seeing parents as burdens rather than people, assets rather than family. My daughter keeps sending brochures for retirement communities. I've started checking my coffee for poison." We laughed, but there was truth beneath the joke. Aging in America had become fraught with new perils. Financial elder abuse had replaced the saber-toothed tiger as the threat to survival. A month after Troy's arrest, Jack called with troubling news. Troy's defense team had found a psychiatrist willing to testify that I exhibited signs of paranoid delusions. They were building a case that Troy had been acting in my best interest, that my injuries were self-inflicted after a fall, and that selling the house was an act of revenge fantasy. "Can they really make that stick?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "It's a stretch," Jack assured me, "especially with Austin's testimony and the physical evidence. But it could create enough reasonable doubt to reduce charges. Troy's looking at potential jail time otherwise." The criminal proceedings dragged on, with motions and counter-motions. The district attorney suggested a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for mandatory anger management, financial restitution, and probation. No jail time. I was conflicted. Part of me wanted Troy to face the harshest possible consequences. Another part remembered holding him as a newborn, teaching him to ride a bike, attending his high school graduation. Despite everything, he was still my son. "What would Sarah want?" I asked Jack one evening as we discussed the plea deal. Jack considered this carefully. Sarah would want justice, but she'd also want healing. For everyone involved, including Troy. I nodded, understanding settling over me. "Tell the DA I'll support the plea deal, with one additional condition. Troy needs therapy. Real therapy, not just anger management." While the legal battles continued, I received an unexpected call from Frank and Nancy Carter, the new owners of my old house. They were planning a small gathering to celebrate 1 month in their new home and wanted me to attend. "We've been making some changes," Frank explained, "but we wanted your blessing. This house has so much history, and we want to honor that while making it our own." The invitation both touched and terrified me. Could I walk back into that house without being overwhelmed by memories, both good and bad? On the day of the gathering, Jack drove me over, sensing my nervousness. "You don't have to do this," he reminded me. "They'll understand if it's too soon." "No," I replied firmly. "This is part of moving forward. I need to see the house becoming a home again, filled with love instead of fear." Frank and Nancy had invited a small group, mostly their friends and a few neighbors. The house looked different already, walls painted in bright, cheerful colors, new furniture arranged to accommodate a baby's needs. Nancy proudly showed me the nursery they were preparing, formerly Troy's childhood bedroom. "We found this behind the dresser when we were painting," she said, handing me a small toy soldier. "We thought you might want it." I turned the small figure over in my palm, remembering the day I had bought the set for Troy's 8th birthday. He had played with them constantly for months, staging elaborate battles across the living room floor. "Thank you," I said, pocketing the soldier. "But I think he should stay here. Every house needs a guardian." As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing, enjoying the laughter and warmth-filling rooms that had recently held so much tension. These young people knew nothing of the pain these walls had witnessed. To them, it was just the beginning of their story, not the end of mine. When it was time to leave, Nancy hugged me impulsively. "You'll come for Thanksgiving? We insist. This house should know family holidays again." I promised to consider it, touched by their generosity of spirit. As Jack drove me home, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to breathe more easily. "You know," Jack said, breaking the comfortable silence, "Sarah would be proud of how you've handled all this." I gazed out at the passing streetlights, thinking of my wife and all we had shared. She always said that houses weren't just structures, they were vessels for memories. I think the house is in good hands now. New memories can begin. Jack nodded, understanding as always. "And what about you, Damien? Are you ready for new memories too?" I considered this question carefully. I think I am. Different ones than I expected at this stage of life. But maybe that's not a bad thing. As we pulled into my driveway, my new home looked welcoming, lights glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. It wasn't the house I had built with my hands decades ago, but it was mine, a place where I could begin again, wiser and more cautious perhaps, but not broken, never broken. 1 year after Troy locked me in the basement, life had found a new rhythm. My ranch house had become a true home, with a thriving vegetable garden in the back and a workshop where I spent most mornings. The quiet community of mostly retirees suited me, offering friendship without intrusion. Troy's case had been resolved 6 months earlier. He accepted the plea deal, pleading guilty to reduced charges of elder abuse and assault. The judge sentenced him to 3 years probation, mandatory therapy, and community service at a senior center. The irony of the latter wasn't lost on anyone. The financial restitution was substantial. Beyond repaying the money he had stolen, Troy was required to cover my medical expenses and the costs associated with my temporary housing and move. His attempts to dispute the amounts were firmly rejected by the court. Judy filed for divorce shortly after Troy's sentencing. The discovery of his affair with her sister had been the final betrayal she couldn't forgive. She found work as an administrative assistant at the local hospital and seemed to be rebuilding her life with quiet determination. My relationship with my grandchildren continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Austin, now 18 and preparing for college, spent even more time at my house, often bringing schoolwork or friends. We had developed a workshop ritual of talking through problems while our hands stayed busy with wood or tools. He seemed to find the same peace in creation that I had always felt. "I got accepted to Pennsylvania State," he announced one Saturday, as we installed cabinets in my laundry room. "Engineering program." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely proud. "Your grandmother would have been thrilled. She always said you had a builder's mind." Austin smiled, though his eyes held a question. "Will you help with tuition? Dad says he can't afford it now, with the restitution payments and divorce." "Already taken care of," I assured him. "I set up education funds for both you and Brittany last year. Your futures shouldn't be compromised by adult mistakes." His relief was palpable. "Thanks, Grandpa. I promise I won't waste the opportunity." "I know you won't." The most surprising development came 3 months ago, when Brittany called out of the blue, asking if we could meet for coffee. At 19, she had graduated high school and was working at a local boutique while figuring out her next steps. Our reunion was awkward at first, both of us carefully avoiding any mention of Troy. But as we relaxed into safer topics, I glimpsed the thoughtful young woman emerging from behind her defensive walls. "Austin keeps saying I should see your new place," she finally ventured as we finished our coffee. "You're welcome any time," I replied. trying to keep my voice casual despite my racing heart. Sunday dinners are at 5, if you're ever free. The following Sunday, she appeared on my doorstep, hesitant but determined. I brought dessert, she said, holding out a store-bought pie. I can't bake like Grandma could. Neither can I admitted, ushering her inside. That's why I always handle the main course and leave dessert to braver souls. That first dinner stretched into 4 hours of increasingly comfortable conversation. Since then, she had become a regular at Sunday dinners, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes arriving early to help cook. Last week, she had finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I'm sorry I believed Dad over you," she said abruptly while setting the table. "I was wrong. You were loyal," I corrected gently. "That's never wrong. You just placed your loyalty before you had all the facts." "Still," she persisted, "I should have questioned things more. The way he talked about you, what he did, it wasn't right." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. But understanding that shows your own moral compass is working just fine." My relationship with Troy himself remained complicated. Following his therapist's recommendation, he had sent a formal letter of apology 3 months into treatment. The words seemed genuine, acknowledging his actions without excuses. I responded with a brief note, accepting the apology but maintaining the court-ordered distance between us. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, he sent flowers to her grave with a card that included my name alongside his. It was a small gesture but significant. Troy was confronting not just what he had done to me, but the ways he had betrayed his mother's memory as well. Jack, ever the practical one, remained skeptical. "People can change," he acknowledged during one of our regular chess games, "but I'd wait for sustained evidence before lowering your guard." "Trust but verify," I agreed, capturing his bishop. Ronald Reagan's wisdom applies to family as well as nuclear disarmament. Frank and Nancy Carter had become unexpected friends. Their daughter Eliza had been born healthy and strong, and I had surprised myself by accepting their Thanksgiving invitation. Sitting in my former dining room, watching new life and love fill the space, I found healing rather than pain. They consulted me occasionally about house matters, embracing the history of the place while making it unmistakably their own. When Frank mentioned wanting to expand the back deck, I offered to help design it, finding joy in the chance to add one more improvement to the house I had built so long ago. My Vietnam buddies remained a constant support, our coffee meetings expanding to include fishing trips and even a memorable road trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorial. These men understood what it meant to survive trauma, to rebuild, to find purpose in the after. Looking back over this tumultuous year, I realized how much my perspective had shifted. The betrayal still hurt when I allowed myself to dwell on it, but it no longer defined me. What Troy did was about his character, not mine. His choices, not my failures as a father. Sarah had seen what I couldn't, her mother's intuition recognizing the darkness growing in our son long before it fully emerged. But even she couldn't have predicted how far things would go. Some wounds can't be prevented, only survived. The new home I had created for myself wasn't what I had planned for my retirement years. There was a solitude I hadn't expected, a self-reliance I hadn't anticipated needing. But there was also freedom in this new life, an authenticity that came from rebuilding on my own terms. Last month, I finally felt ready to fulfill a promise I had made to Sarah years ago. We had always talked about traveling after retirement, seeing the national parks we had only viewed in documentaries. With Jack's encouragement, I booked a small group tour of the Grand Canyon for seniors. "You're not just surviving anymore, Damien," Jack observed as I showed him the itinerary. "You're living again." He was right. The path forward wasn't the one I would have chosen, but it was mine to walk with whatever dignity and joy I could muster. My son had locked me in a basement and left me for dead, but in doing so, he had inadvertently freed me from patterns and assumptions that had imprisoned me long before those basement doors closed. This Sunday, Austin and Brittany are coming for dinner, along with some of my new neighbors and Jack's family. I'm trying a new recipe, something challenging that would have intimidated me a year ago. My hands are steadier now, my heart lighter. The house Troy tried to steal from me has become a home for a young family building their future. The basement that was meant to be my prison led to an independence I might never have found otherwise. The betrayal that should have broken me instead revealed a strength I had forgotten I possessed. I don't know if Troy and I will ever fully reconcile. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes. But I do know that I won't allow his actions to poison whatever time I have left. Sarah always said that living well was the best response to hardship. As usual, my wife was right. So I build furniture for my new home. I tend my garden. I teach my grandson the skills my father taught me. I plan trips to places I've always wanted to see. I make new friends and cherish old ones. I leave the basement door open. Always. A reminder that I will never be trapped again. Because that's the lesson I finally learned at 68 years old. Family should be about love and respect, not obligation and fear. True family can be born of blood or choice, but it must always be nurtured with kindness. And when that fundamental contract is broken, we have not just the right but the responsibility to build something better from the ruins. Have you ever had to make the painful choice to distance yourself from family who caused you harm, or found yourself rebuilding your life after betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes our most difficult chapters lead to the most meaningful growth. If you found value in this story, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power and rebuild. Your support means everything to this channel. Thank you for listening to my journey. May your own path, whatever its challenges, lead you to peace and healing.